The morning after it all broke open was quiet. Outside the glass doors of the kitchen, the sun warmed the backyard in muted gold, but inside the Hartley house, the air hung heavy with things left unsaid. Emily Hartley stirred her coffee absently, her hands trembling just enough to cause tiny ripples on the surface of the cup. Across the marble island, her husband, Daniel, sat stiff-backed, clutching his phone like it might save him from drowning. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them had to. The night before, Emily had found the texts, hundreds of them, threaded into Daniel's secret conversation with a woman she barely knew, Mara Lindell, the new senior architect at Daniel's firm. Mara was younger, electric, with a smile that didn't seem to cost her anything. Emily, on the other hand, had built their life brick by careful brick, sacrificing late nights and her own career ambitions to raise their two boys and keep the Hartley house looking like something out of a magazine. She hadn't realized how fragile it all was until she saw, in black and white, how easily Daniel had kicked over the foundation. It was just emotional, Daniel had said the night before, voice cracking under the weight of a lie. Even he didn't believe. It didn't mean anything. Now, staring at him in the morning light, Emily wasn't sure if she hated him or just hated herself more for not seeing it coming. Chapter 2. Fractures. Their suburban Connecticut town was the kind of place where scandal traveled faster than wildfire. By noon, Emily's sister Lauren had already called twice. By 3, Daniel's best friend Kyle was knocking at the door under the pretense of returning borrowed tools, but his awkward half-hugs and muttered apologies made it clear he knew. The worst part? Mara wasn't even discreet. She had sent screenshots of their messages to half the firm after Daniel tried to pull away, angry that he hadn't chosen her. Emily didn't know what hurt more, the betrayal itself or the humiliation. That night, Daniel offered to leave. "I'll get a hotel," he said, voice thick with shame. Emily shook her head once. "No, you stay. You deal with this. I'm not hiding in my own house." They slept in separate rooms, the hallway between them stretching like a battlefield lined with mines. Chapter 3. A quiet investigation days turned into a week. When Daniel wasn't home, Emily found herself spiraling. Was Mara the first? Was there more? She needed to know, even if she hated herself for needing it. So she hired someone, a private investigator named Grace Tolland, a friend of a friend, who promised to be discreet. Within days, Grace returned with a folder that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. No other affairs, no hotel receipts, no secret second phone. Just Mara, and a string of desperate, foolish messages from Daniel, who had clearly fallen into some midlife crisis cliché without even the dignity to hide it well. Still, Emily felt no relief. Betrayal wasn't measured in quantity. Chapter 4. Ghosts in the walls. Daniel tried. God, he tried. He made dinners. He offered to do therapy. He wrote letters he left on her pillow, pages and pages of apologies and promises. And sometimes, when Emily woke in the middle of the night, she would hear him crying through the walls, the soft, broken sound of a man who knew he had destroyed the best thing he'd ever had. But Emily didn't know how to cross back over. Some nights she read his letters. Others, she went for long drives and imagined what it would be like to start over somewhere else, somewhere nobody knew she had been made a fool. Chapter 5. Crossroads. The final confrontation wasn't a fight. It wasn't screaming or broken plates. It was quieter than that, more dangerous. They sat across from each other on the back porch one night, a bottle of wine between them, their boys asleep upstairs. "I don't know how to forgive you," Emily said, staring into the dark yard. Daniel nodded, looking older than she had ever seen him. "I don't know how to forgive myself." The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of grief, of love, of the things they had built and now watched splinter. "You didn't fall in love with her, did you?" Emily asked suddenly. Daniel swallowed. "No," he whispered. "I didn't even fall out of love with you." Tears burned her eyes, but she blinked them away. Love wasn't the question anymore. Trust was. And trust, once broken, didn't just come back because someone said sorry. Chapter 6. Choices. Lauren begged her to leave him. Kyle begged Daniel not to give up. Even Grace, the private investigator who had seen hundreds of marriages crack under the pressure, offered Emily quiet, unexpected advice over coffee one day. People think forgiveness is a grand gesture. It's not. It's tiny, brutal choices every day to stay, or not. In the end, Emily packed a small suitcase, not to leave forever, but to leave for a while. "I need to remember who I am without you," she told Daniel, standing in the doorway. He didn't beg. He just nodded, a single tear slipping down his cheek. He understood. Maybe for the first time, he really understood. Epilogue: Splintered Glass. 6 months later, the Hartley house still stood, beautiful, hollow, and waiting. Emily lived in a small apartment downtown now, closer to the bookstore she used to love before she became Emily Hartley, wife and mother. Some nights she answered Daniel's texts. Some nights she didn't. Some days she pictured them rebuilding from the ashes. Other days she imagined selling the house, splitting everything down the middle and walking away for good. She didn't know yet which future she would choose, and for the first time in a long time, that uncertainty didn't terrify her. It set her free. 3 more months passed. Daniel didn't date. He didn't beg. He didn't even pretend. Instead, he worked on himself with a therapist, attending grueling counseling sessions, even joining a men's group focused on emotional honesty, something he once would have laughed off. Emily saw it quietly from a distance. No grand gestures, no declarations. Just a man, broken and trying, without expecting reward. One rainy Thursday evening, Emily found herself outside the house again, the house that used to feel like a cage, but now seemed empty without her. Daniel opened the door, surprised, his hands still wet from washing dishes. He said nothing. Neither did she. Instead, Emily stepped inside, dropped her umbrella, and let the silence fill the space between them. "We start from zero," she said finally. Daniel nodded, his voice shaking. "Zero. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But something rawer, harder, and maybe real enough to last. Alternative ending. 2. Quiet revenge. Emily filed for divorce 2 months after she moved out. She made it clean but firm. No shouting matches, no desperate pleas. Daniel agreed to everything she asked for. The house, majority custody of the boys, half his retirement. When the papers were finalized, Emily did something else. Using the screenshots from Mara, she quietly sent anonymous tips to the firm's board of directors, questioning Daniel's ethical conduct. She didn't relish it, but she didn't regret it either. Daniel lost his promotion. His golden boy reputation soured. Emily moved on, not out of bitterness, but from a need to reclaim her dignity on her own terms. Some nights, she wondered if revenge had poisoned her heart, but most nights, she slept just fine. Alternative ending 3. New love. New betrayal life had a cruel sense of humor. A year after moving downtown, Emily met someone new, Jonah, a literature professor who loved poetry and made her laugh in ways she had forgotten she could. It started slowly. Coffee dates, lazy Sunday mornings. For the first time in a long time, Emily thought maybe happiness wasn't a lost cause, until the night she found a message on Jonah's phone, an old flame he hadn't quite severed, a string of flirty texts, half-truths, little betrayals in miniature. It wasn't catastrophic, like Daniel's betrayal, but it still cut deep. Emily sat alone in her apartment that night, realizing a hard truth. Trust wasn't something you found in someone else. It was something you built inside yourself and guarded fiercely. She didn't confront Jonah. She didn't have to. Instead, she packed her bag again and walked out the door into the cool night air, finally certain she could survive whatever came next. Final note, each version leaves Emily changed, but not broken. Whether she chooses fragile rebuilding, measured revenge, or forging a new life alone, the emotional center remains the same. She refuses to lose herself again. Would you like me to write a short epilogue scene set years later showing where Emily ends up depending on which path you choose? For example, what her life looks like 5 years after reconciliation, after divorce, or after finding strength alone. Which version calls to you most? The Hartley house didn't look quite the same anymore. The white walls were now a warm, earthy green. The photos on the mantel showed newer memories. Family hikes, messy birthday cakes, vacations where no one had pretended to be happy for the camera. Emily leaned against the kitchen counter, watching Daniel fuss over dinner, apron tied awkwardly around his waist. There were still scars between them, things said and unsaid. But there was also a gentler kind of love now, less blind, more deliberate. Trust hadn't been rebuilt in a day. Some days it still cracked. But they had made a choice to stay when it was easier to leave, 1,000 brutal choices one after another. "Hey, Em," Daniel called. "You gonna burn the bread again?" Emily smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because she knew, finally, it didn't have to be. 5 years. Later. Quiet. Revenge. Emily watched from her small but sunlit office downtown as the first snow of winter dusted the city streets. Her name was now etched in silver letters on the glass. Emily Hartley. Private mediation and family law. Helping others through the wreckage of broken promises felt strangely healing. She'd never remarried. Never needed to. Daniel had moved 3 towns over. They co-parented civilly, though he always looked slightly hollow when he dropped the boys off, as if still carrying a guilt he could never quite put down. She didn't hate him anymore. Pity, maybe. A distant, soft kind of sadness. Emily sipped her coffee, turned back to her case notes, and smiled to herself. Some battles didn't end with victory or defeat, just quiet survival. And sometimes that was enough. 5 years later. New love, new betrayal. The Pacific coastline stretched endlessly before her, the ocean breathing slow and steady like a living thing. Emily walked barefoot along the beach, the hem of her linen dress catching the breeze. No man at her side. No regrets. After Jonah, she had made herself a promise. She would not build her life around someone else's broken promises again. She traveled. She wrote. She laughed loudly without apology. Loneliness visited sometimes, sure, but it never stayed. She was never lonely for herself. At sunset, she sat on a piece of driftwood and wrote postcards to her sons, now both in college, fierce and free in ways she had once only dreamed for them. "Find your own North Star," she wrote, "and never let anyone else hold your map." She dropped the postcard into the mailbox at the edge of the boardwalk, smiling into the fading light. Emily Hartley was alone, and Emily Hartley was alive. Daniel Hartley sat alone on the back porch, a glass of scotch warming slowly in his hand. The sun was dipping below the rooftops, setting the world on fire for just a few final moments. The house behind him was quieter now. Too quiet. Even when the boys were home for the occasional weekend, even when laughter filled the kitchen again for a heartbeat, it was never the same. He was still a guest inside his own life. He watched the old oak tree at the edge of the yard, the one he and Emily had planted when they bought the house. It was taller now, its roots deep and stubborn. Just like her, he thought. Daniel sometimes dreamed of those early days. Burnt coffee, mismatched furniture, Emily's head thrown back in real laughter. Before ambition, before temptation, before he became the man who could look into his wife's eyes and lie. The scotch burned his throat, but he welcomed it. Penitence in small doses. He didn't blame her for leaving, or for staying distant if she had stayed. He didn't even blame her for the quiet revenge she'd taken, the whispered rumors that had followed him through the firm. He blamed himself, and he lived with it, quietly. Daniel raised his glass slightly toward the oak tree, a silent toast, to a life he once held in his hands and had let slip through. "Wherever you are, Em," he murmured into the dusk, "I hope you're free." The stars began to bleed into the darkening sky, one by one, indifferent and eternal. And Daniel sat there long, after the night swallowed him whole. The wedding. The church smelled faintly of old wood, melting candles, and something green. Lilies, maybe. Emily adjusted the silver bracelet at her wrist, the one she always fidgeted with when she was nervous. She hadn't expected to feel this, unsettled. Not after all this time. She caught sight of Daniel across the aisle before he saw her, his profile still sharply familiar, the set of his shoulders, the line of his jaw. Older now, a little grayer around the temples. Still Daniel. But not hers anymore. Their eyes met a second later, an almost physical collision. He gave the smallest nod. She returned it, her face neutral, heart hammering like she'd just stumbled into a memory she hadn't prepared to relive. During the ceremony, Emily tried to focus on the couple at the altar, on their whispered vows, the trembling, hopeful smiles. But her mind wandered. To her own wedding. To Daniel's hand squeezing hers too tightly, both of them too young to understand the weight of the promises they were making. After the ceremony, there was nowhere to hide. He found her near the courtyard fountain, where the early evening light made everything glow a little softer than it deserved. "Hey, Em," Daniel said, his voice rougher than she remembered. "Hey," she answered, arms folded loosely across her chest. Silence stretched between them, thick, aching, strangely gentle. "You look good," he said finally, like it hurt him a little to say it. "So do you," she lied. A beat. "I think about you," Daniel said, eyes skimming the ground, then back to her face. "More than I should." Emily swallowed hard, the old wound flexing like a phantom limb. 5 years, and still some part of her wanted an apology bigger than words could hold. 5 years, and still some part of her wanted to hold his hand just to remember what it felt like. "I'm happy, Daniel," she said quietly, almost apologetically. "I hope you are, too." His smile was slow, sad. "I'm better. Some days." They stood there a moment longer, the world bustling gently around them. Old friends laughing, glasses clinking, the scent of gardenias riding the breeze. In another life, maybe they would have rebuilt what they broke. In this one, all they could do was honor the wreckage. "Take care, Em," he said. "You too," she whispered. And then she turned and walked away, the grass damp under her heels, the evening folding itself around her like a memory already fading. Daniel watched her go, hands stuffed into the pockets of his jacket. There were no second chances, only the grace to know when to let go. The fountain burbled behind him, indifferent and eternal. The hotel room was small but clean. Just a bed, a window cracked open to the night, and a chair draped with her shawl. Emily sat at the edge of the bed, brushing out her hair slowly, the bristles catching on a few stubborn tangles. Each pass through her hair felt almost ceremonial, like shedding skin, combing out ghosts. The wedding had blurred into a collage of smiles and champagne and drifting music. But Daniel's face, that stayed sharp. She set the brush down carefully on the nightstand and stared at her reflection in the darkened window. There was a softness around her eyes now, the kind that didn't come from weakness, but from surviving. She thought about what he had said. I think about you, more than I should. Maybe there would always be a tether between them. Not tight enough to pull her back, but never cleanly severed. Maybe love didn't die. It just changed shape, became something quieter, heavier, tucked away where no one could see it. And maybe that was all right. Emily pulled the blankets up around her shoulders and curled onto her side, the cool sheets whispering against her skin. She didn't cry. She didn't ache the way she once would have. She simply lay there, listening to the pulse of the city outside, the steady, living heartbeat of a world that kept moving forward whether she was ready or not. Somewhere across town, Daniel was doing the same, lying awake, staring at ceilings, sifting through old memories. But they were no longer the same story. Just two chapters in different books, once bound together, now shelved apart. Emily closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would get up. She would drive home. She would water her plants, answer emails, maybe call her sister. She would keep building this life, stone by stone, breath by breath. And the past would become just that, the past. Outside, the stars blinked against the endless dark, indifferent and eternal, and Emily Hartley slept. Emily hovered near the poetry shelf, the book still pressed against her chest. She could feel Daniel's presence behind her, not imposing, but unmistakably there. And then she heard his footsteps, hesitant, thoughtful, approaching. Emily, he said, voice low, uncertain. She turned, heart steady now, calmer than she would have thought. Hey, Daniel, she said, offering a small smile. For a second, he just looked at her, drinking in the years, the differences, the things time had not erased. I didn't expect to see you here, he said. Me neither, she answered lightly, shifting the book in her hands. A pause. Not awkward, just full of things neither of them quite knew how to say. You look... He stopped himself, smiled a little, at his own clumsiness. You look happy. Emily tilted her head, considering him. I am, she said honestly. Most days. Daniel's eyes softened, a mixture of relief and something more complicated. Regret, maybe, or just memory. I'm glad, he said. You deserve it. Another silence. Not heavy, just real. And you? Emily asked, surprising herself. Daniel nodded slowly. I'm getting there. It wasn't a lie. It wasn't a promise either. Just the messy truth of a life rebuilt from broken pieces. They stood there a moment longer, two people who had once believed they'd never survive without each other. Now strangers? Now witnesses to each other's survival? Emily smiled again, a little sadder this time. I should go, she said, holding up her book. Yeah, Daniel said, stepping aside gently. As she brushed past him, Daniel said, so quietly she almost missed it. I'm sorry, Emily. For everything. She paused, hand on the door, and without turning around, she said just as quietly, I forgave you a long time ago. Then she pushed the door open and stepped into the cool sunlight, the street alive with new beginnings. Behind her, the little bell above the bookstore door chimed once, sweet and final. Emily had always prided herself on her ability to read people, to feel the shifts in a room, the little tremors before a storm. But nothing had prepared her for the day Daniel's silence grew too loud to ignore. It was a Wednesday, ordinary in every way. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the tall apartment buildings, casting a warm glow across the kitchen table where they sat. She had made dinner, even set the table with the kind of care she hadn't used in months. It should have been a normal evening. But somehow, it wasn't. Daniel was looking at his phone, his face unreadable. She had asked him 3 times if everything was okay. The 4th time, the question lodged in her throat like something sharp, something she didn't want to ask but couldn't avoid any longer. It wasn't until he put the phone down, with a heavy sigh, as if the weight of it all had become unbearable, that she realized something was wrong. Emily. Daniel's voice was so soft, it felt like a whisper meant for someone else. Her heart stuttered. Daniel, what is it? She leaned forward, trying to meet his eyes, but he looked away. What's going on? His hands trembled for just a second before he folded them in his lap. His jaw tightened. And then he said the word she would never forget. I've been seeing someone else. The world seemed to still. Time, her heartbeat, even the air. All of it stopped. She felt the room narrow, the space between them growing impossibly wide until she couldn't breathe. And she couldn't move. She had expected a confession, sure, but not this. Not so easily, not so casually. I'm sorry, Daniel said, but the words felt empty, hollow, like they had been rehearsed 1,000 times, and none of them carried any weight. Emily looked at him, eyes wide, unsure whether she was seeing the man she had loved for 10 years or a stranger who had taken his place. What does that mean? Her voice was barely a whisper now. It means I'm leaving, Daniel replied, his voice colder than she had ever heard it. I'm not happy anymore. And I think it's best we both move on. She didn't know how long she sat there, staring at him, trying to understand. It wasn't the words that hurt the most. It was the absence of them, the finality of the silence between them. The days that followed were a blur. Emily moved through them like someone in a fog, each moment a quiet echo of the one before. She couldn't tell where the numbness ended and the pain began. She hadn't expected this, not from Daniel, not after everything they'd built together. Their life, their plans, had seemed solid, unshakable. She had always believed that the small cracks they'd ignored over the years were just temporary, that the distance between them would mend itself, as it always had before. But now, those cracks seemed to stretch out before her, wide and jagged, pulling at the edges of everything she thought was real. She spent the first few nights in their bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the moment Daniel spoke the words that shattered their life. She'd begged for answers, for reasons, for anything. But the more she demanded, the more he withdrew, his silence a wall she couldn't scale. She hated him for it. But more than that, she hated herself for still loving him. She hadn't realized how deep her attachment ran until he was gone. She hadn't understood how much of her identity had been shaped by his presence. Now, standing in their apartment, the place that used to feel like home, she felt like a stranger in her own life. She thought about calling her friends, but they hadn't seen the warning signs. They'd all admired Daniel, envied their relationship, and there was no way she could explain the betrayal to them without feeling like a fool. It was a week before Emily finally reached out to someone, but it wasn't her friends. It was her mother. Em, what's going on? I'm worried about you, her mother had said, her voice both concerned and a little panicked. Emily hesitated, her throat tight. She didn't want to tell her, didn't want to admit the truth aloud, but she couldn't keep pretending that. Everything was okay. Not anymore. Mom, he's leaving me. He's been seeing someone else. I don't know what to do. There was a long pause before her mother spoke again. Sweetheart, I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry. You don't deserve this. I don't know what I deserve anymore, Emily said bitterly. I don't even know who I am without him. Her mother's voice softened. You're stronger than you think. You've always been. You'll figure this out, but you don't have to go through it alone. I'm here, okay? Emily wiped her eyes, surprised to feel tears she hadn't known were there. Thanks, Mom. Chapter 3. The tangled truth, the next few weeks were spent in a haze of paperwork and practicalities. Emily had to adjust to living alone, to sorting through the pieces of their life. The furniture, the shared bills, the memories that now felt like ghosts. But it wasn't just the physical things that weighed her down. It was the emotional aftermath, the anger, the self-doubt, the overwhelming sense of betrayal that refused to leave her. Every time she saw something that reminded her of Daniel, the framed picture of their wedding day on the mantel, the coffee mug they'd picked up during their vacation in Italy, she felt the sting all over again. She couldn't shake the image of him with someone else, couldn't erase the sound of his voice when he had told her it was over. He hadn't even fought for them, and that was the hardest part. She had always believed he'd fight for her, for them. But when the moment came, Daniel had given up on their love, on their future. It wasn't just the betrayal of his body, but the betrayal of his heart. She could forgive him for the affair, maybe in time, but she wasn't sure she could ever forgive him for walking away without even trying to fix it. There were moments when Emily considered revenge, calling up the woman, confronting her, perhaps even confronting Daniel. But each time, the idea lost its appeal. What would it change? Would it really make her feel better? Or would it just drag her deeper into the mess of their fractured marriage? She started seeing a therapist, trying to process everything. And slowly, through all the talk and reflection, she began to understand the deeper layers of their relationship, the parts she had ignored or dismissed in favor of love. She realized that their marriage hadn't been as perfect as she had believed. The cracks had always been there, even before the affair. She just hadn't been willing to see them. Chapter 4. The breaking point. It was the middle of the night when Emily's phone rang. It was Daniel. Her heart stopped for a moment, a mixture of anger and confusion flooding her veins. "What do you want?" "Daniel!" Her voice was low, tight, barely holding it together. I need to talk to you," he said. "Can we meet, please?" Emily squeezed her eyes shut. The last thing she wanted was to see him again. But she knew she needed answers, whether she was ready for them or not. "Fine," she said, her voice clipped. "Tomorrow morning. Cafe on 4th. Don't be late." The next day, she arrived early, sitting by the window, watching the street as if it could give her answers before Daniel arrived. When he finally walked through the door, Emily's chest tightened. He was dressed casually, his hair messy, his face drawn, but still the man she had once loved. He sat down across from her, his eyes downcast. "I know I don't deserve this, but I need to tell you something." Emily stared at him, heart pounding. "Go on," she said, her voice barely audible. "I regret it," Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I regret everything. The affair. How I ended it. Leaving you. I was selfish, and I can't undo it, but I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Emily held his gaze, her hands clenched around her coffee cup. "I don't need your apology," she said, the words cold, sharp. "I just needed the truth." Daniel nodded slowly. "I know, and that's why I'm here. I need you to know that I never wanted to hurt you. I was lost, and I didn't think about what I was doing. But I see it now. And I'll spend the rest of my life regretting it." For a moment, they just sat there, the space between them thick with unspoken words. Emily stood up slowly, the weight of everything pressing down on her. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Daniel, but I don't think it's with me anymore." Without another word, she turned and walked out of the cafe, feeling the door close behind her, a finality in the sound that echoed through her chest. The air felt heavier after that meeting, as if it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken things between them. Daniel's apology lingered, but it didn't comfort her. She had wanted closure, but what he offered wasn't enough. She was left with the taste of unfinished business, not just with him, but with herself. The next few days were quiet, each one a battle between what she felt and what she knew she had to do. It wasn't that she didn't still love Daniel. It wasn't that the years they had spent together could be erased by one confession. But the love she had for him wasn't the same anymore. It had been fractured, shattered by lies and betrayal, and she wasn't sure she could ever piece it back together. Emily spent more time at work, burying herself in her job to avoid facing the reality of her personal life. It was easier to focus on the world outside, the emails to answer, the meetings to attend, the deadlines to meet. It was when she came home at night that the silence felt unbearable. The emptiness of their apartment seemed to close in on her, and she found herself staring at the walls, wondering where she went wrong. There were nights when she couldn't sleep, her mind replaying every moment with Daniel, wondering if there were signs she missed. Maybe if she had been more attentive, more understanding, this wouldn't have happened. Maybe if she had fought harder for them, she wouldn't be standing here alone. But the truth was, Emily had been doing everything she could to hold things together for years. She had tried to ignore the subtle distance between them, tried to convince herself that everything was fine. The cracks had been there all along. She just hadn't been brave enough to face them. Chapter 6. Unraveling the past it was during one of her sleepless nights that Emily found herself going through old photos. The wedding pictures, the vacations, the memories they had made together. She picked up one photo in particular. A picture of them on their honeymoon, laughing under the sun in a small seaside town. She could almost hear their voices, see the excitement in Daniel's eyes. She had believed in that moment, believed in their future. But looking at the photo now, she felt a sharp pang of grief. That love was gone, and it wasn't just because of the affair. It was because they had both lost sight of each other long before it ever happened. They had been so caught up in their own lives, their own routines, that they had stopped communicating. They had stopped being partners, and instead, they had become two people merely coexisting. There was a knock at the door, pulling her from her thoughts. It was her neighbor, Sarah, a kind woman who had been a quiet presence in her life for the past few years. Emily had kept her distance, not wanting to burden anyone with her pain, but Sarah had been persistent in checking on her. "Can I come in?" Sarah asked gently, standing at the threshold. Emily hesitated for a moment, then nodded, stepping aside to let her in. "I'm sorry to intrude," Sarah said, her voice soft. "I just wanted to make sure you're okay," Emily managed, a small smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm getting by." Sarah looked at her with concern, then lowered her voice. "You know, I've seen the way Daniel has been lately. He's been not himself. And I know it's none of my business, but I just want you to know that I'm here for you. If you ever want to talk, or just need someone to sit with you, I'm around." The kindness in Sarah's words made something inside Emily crack. She didn't want to cry. She didn't want to feel vulnerable, but the pressure had been building, and it spilled over in that moment. "Thank you," Emily whispered. "I don't even know what I'm doing anymore. I thought I had everything figured out, but now I'm just lost." Sarah sat down beside her, her presence quiet but steady. "It's okay to feel lost, Em. You've been through something no one should have to endure, but you'll find your way through it. You don't have to have all the answers right now." Emily nodded, wiping her eyes. "I don't know if I can ever forgive him for what he did, but I also don't know if I can let go of the love we had. I don't even know if I can trust myself anymore." "You don't have to have it all figured out," Sarah said gently. Just take it one step at a time. Let yourself feel what you need to feel. And when you're ready, you'll know what to do. Chapter 7. The Turning Point. The weeks passed. Emily began to change. She started attending therapy more regularly, working through the anger, the hurt, the confusion. It wasn't easy. In fact, it was often painful. But with each session, she felt a little lighter, a little more herself. She also started reconnecting with friends, those she had drifted away from during her marriage. Her life had been so centered around Daniel for so long, she had forgotten how important it was to have a support system, to have people who truly understood her. And then one day, Emily did something she hadn't expected. She called Daniel. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice surprisingly calm. Daniel was hesitant at first, but agreed. They met at a park, neutral ground, a place where they could talk without the weight of their past hanging over them. As they sat down on a bench, the silence stretched out between them, thick with history. "You wanted to talk," Daniel said after a long pause. "What is it?" Emily looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in months. The man she had loved so deeply was still there, but so much had changed. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," she said softly, her eyes not leaving his. "But I'm trying. For me, not for you." Daniel nodded, his face filled with regret. "I'll never ask for your forgiveness, Emily. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I am sorry. Truly." There was a long silence between them, but this time it wasn't suffocating. It was just a space that was finally filled with truth. "I'm not sure what happens now," Emily said finally, standing up from the bench. "But I'm not the same person I was when you left. And I don't know if I'll ever be that person again." "Maybe that's a good thing," Daniel replied quietly. As Emily walked away from him, the weight she had been carrying for so long felt just a little bit lighter. She wasn't free of the pain yet, but she was starting to accept that healing was a process. And that forgiveness, even if it never came, wasn't the only way forward. The days that followed were quieter than Emily had expected. There was no dramatic confrontation, no sudden realization. What she had learned in the weeks since her conversation with Daniel was that the road to healing wasn't linear. It wasn't about reaching some final destination of forgiveness or closure. It was about learning how to live with the new reality, the one shaped by the betrayal, and the one that was still unfolding. Emily began taking small steps, things she hadn't allowed herself to do in years. She took up painting again, a hobby she had abandoned when her life had become entirely about Daniel and their shared plans. She went to yoga classes on Sundays and started visiting her parents more, a balm for the loneliness she had struggled with since the fallout. But more than anything, Emily learned to rediscover herself. She stopped thinking about what Daniel would want or what her life with him might have been if things had turned out differently. She focused on what she needed, what she wanted for herself. And it was strange, almost foreign at first, but liberating. Chapter 9. The weight of new choices. As Emily moved forward, Daniel's presence lingered, though he respected her boundaries. He still texted her occasionally, short, polite messages that seemed to acknowledge the space between them without demanding anything more. He had been trying to fix the broken pieces of their past, but Emily wasn't sure if fixing was the right word anymore. One evening, as she sat on the couch with a glass of wine, she received a call from him. It had been a few weeks since they last spoke, and the familiar name on her phone startled her. Hesitant, she answered. "Emily," Daniel said, his voice strained. "I just wanted to check in. I know things are still tense between us, but I wanted to tell you that I'm working on being a better person. For myself, and I hope for you too." She could hear the sincerity in his voice, but it didn't change the hurt that had settled in her chest. She had no idea what to say in response. Part of her still missed him, missed the version of him she had loved before the lies and deceit. But part of her resented that the apology had come so late. "I appreciate you saying that," Emily replied, slowly. "But I need time, Daniel. I don't know what this, whatever it is, will look like." Daniel's silence stretched out for a long moment. "I understand," he finally said, his voice soft. "If you need me, I'm here. But I'll give you space, Emily, I promise." After the call ended, Emily sat in the silence of her apartment, wondering if she would ever truly be free of the past. But she knew this was part of her journey now. The future, whatever it was, wasn't going to be defined by what had happened with Daniel. It couldn't be. Chapter 10. The unexpected turn months passed, and as Emily continued to grow, she also found herself encountering new faces, new opportunities. One day, as she was sitting at a local coffee shop, trying to focus on a new project at work, she saw him, Ryan. He had been a friend of hers from years ago, someone she had shared late-night conversations with when they were both still in college. Back then, they'd flirted, laughed, but it never went anywhere. She hadn't seen him in years, but here he was, standing across from her at the counter, holding a cup of coffee and looking exactly like the person she'd always remembered. "Emily?" Ryan's voice broke through her thoughts, and she looked up, startled. A hesitant smile spread across his face as he approached her table. "Ryan? Wow, it's been a long time," she said, genuinely surprised. "I know," he said, sitting down across from her. "I've been meaning to reach out for a while, but life, you know how it gets. You look great." Emily gave a tight smile. "Thank you. So do you. How have you been?" Ryan shrugged. "Busy, you know. Got a job in marketing now. But I've been thinking about you. How's everything? Last time we talked, you were with Daniel, right?" She hesitated. The mention of Daniel still made something heavy settle in her stomach, but she couldn't avoid it forever. "I was. That's a whole story in itself." "Yeah, I get that," Ryan said, his tone softening. "I'm sorry to hear that things didn't work out, but it's good to see you doing well. You deserve that." As the conversation turned to old memories, Emily found herself laughing again. Not the forced, hollow laughs that had slipped out during the past few months, but the genuine kind that felt light and free. Ryan was easy to talk to, like no time had passed at all. It wasn't romantic, not yet at least. But for the first time in a long while, Emily felt something stirring inside her, hope, perhaps, or maybe curiosity. Whatever it was a reminder that her life was still full of possibilities. Chapter 11. A bittersweet moment. That evening, Emily sat on the balcony of her apartment, staring out at the city below. Her thoughts swirled, tangled in a web of past and present, of the memories she couldn't escape and the future she couldn't yet see clearly. It was a lonely feeling, but it was also liberating. Her phone buzzed on the table and she picked it up without thinking. It was a text from Daniel. "I miss you, Emily. I don't know if I'll ever be the person you deserve, but I hope you know that I'm trying." The words hit her harder than she expected. They weren't the words of someone trying to win her back, but of someone who was still grieving the loss of something they couldn't fix. Emily closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She missed him too, but she also knew she couldn't go back to the way things were. Not when everything had changed. She put the phone down and let the cool breeze wash over her, feeling the weight of the past slip further away with each passing moment. The truth was, she didn't have all the answers. She didn't know if she would ever forgive Daniel completely. She didn't know if she could ever let someone else in. But what she did know was this. She was learning to be her own person again. She was finding strength in places she hadn't expected. And that, for now, was enough. The future was uncertain, but Emily was finally ready to face it, whatever it may bring. weeks passed, and Emily's interactions with Ryan became more frequent. What began as casual coffee meetups turned into dinners and longer conversations, often lasting well into the night. They reconnected in ways she hadn't expected, but she was cautious, very cautious. She was still processing her feelings about Daniel, about the betrayal, and about what it meant to move forward. But Ryan, with his easygoing charm and understanding presence, seemed to understand that she needed time. One evening, as they sat at a small Italian restaurant in the city, Ryan's gaze softened. The flickering candlelight illuminated his features, and for a moment, Emily felt an unfamiliar warmth inside her. "You know," he said, breaking the silence, "when we were in college, I always thought you'd end up with someone who'd make you feel like you were the center of their world, someone who would appreciate you for all the things you're capable of. I'm not sure if Daniel ever did that." Emily looked at him, surprised by the honesty in his voice. It wasn't an accusation, but it was a quiet observation, one that resonated deeply within her. "You're right," she replied softly. "I think that's what I wanted. But somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that just being with him was enough. I thought love, real love, was about making compromises. But now I see. I lost myself trying to make things work that just couldn't." Ryan nodded, his expression somber. "It's not easy. You give so much of yourself to someone, and then, when it all falls apart, you feel like there's nothing left. But you're still here, Emily. You've got so much left in you, and whatever happens, you deserve someone who sees that, really sees it." For a moment, Emily's heart ached. It wasn't that she wasn't grateful for Ryan's presence in her life, or his kind words, but she wasn't ready to open herself up fully to someone else. Not yet. Not after everything that had happened. She wasn't sure she could trust herself to love again. Chapter 13. Ghosts of the past. One afternoon, while Emily was at home, her phone buzzed. It was an unexpected message from Daniel. "I know this might be too much to ask, but could we meet? I need to talk. There are things I've been holding on to, things I never said before. Please, just one last time. I'll respect whatever you decide, but I need you to hear me out." Her first reaction was to ignore it. She had made so much progress, distancing herself from the past. But there was something in his words that tugged at her, something that felt final, like a door that was closing for good. She typed out a quick response, agreeing to meet him at the park they had visited so many times before, under the oak tree they had sat beneath during the early days of their relationship. It felt strangely fitting that this chapter of her life, marked by hurt and betrayal, would also end there. Chapter 14. The Final Confrontation. The park was quiet when Emily arrived. The air was cool, the kind of early autumn chill that made you feel alive. As she walked toward the oak tree, she spotted Daniel sitting on one of the benches. His posture was slumped, his hands folded in his lap, as though he were waiting for something, or someone, to make the next move. When he saw her, he stood up slowly, as if unsure of how to approach. Emily felt a rush of conflicting emotions: anger, sadness, confusion, but there was also a sense of closure. "Emily," Daniel said softly, his voice hoarse, "I've been thinking a lot about us, about everything I did, everything I didn't do. And I know I can't undo the past, but I wanted to say, I'm sorry. From the bottom of my heart, I'm sorry." Her breath caught in her throat. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Daniel. Not yet. Maybe not ever." He nodded, his face tight with regret. "I understand. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Emily. I just want you to know that I've changed. I'm not the same person I was when I hurt you. I wish I could go back and do things differently. I wish I could have seen what I had before I lost it. There was a long pause as Emily tried to process his words. Her heart ached, but it was a distant ache now, something that had faded over time. I don't need you to be someone else, Daniel. I just need you to understand that what you did wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice, and it hurt me in ways I can't even explain. But it's not about me anymore, is it? It's about you and how you need to move forward. But I can't be part of that. Daniel's eyes filled with tears, and Emily saw the man he could have been, the man she had once loved. But that man no longer existed. She had built a new life, one without him, and she wasn't going to let his ghost haunt her any longer. He nodded again, his shoulders slumping in resignation. I understand. I really do. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, and that I'll always care about you. Always. The words hung in the air between them like a fragile thread, too, delicate to touch. Emily took a deep breath, a weight lifting from her chest. I'll remember that, she said quietly, turning to walk away. Goodbye, Daniel. As she walked away from him, towards the life she was building for herself, Emily realized that forgiveness didn't always mean reconciling. Sometimes it meant letting go. Sometimes it meant choosing yourself, even when it felt impossible. Chapter 15. The Future. Begins in. The weeks that followed, Emily continued to build her life step by step. Her relationship with Ryan deepened, but there were no grand promises. Just two people, figuring it out, trying to be honest with each other in a way she hadn't been able to do with Daniel. She still had bad days. Days when the pain of betrayal resurfaced like a wound that had never fully healed. But she was learning that healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning how to live with it and to move forward despite it. And maybe, just maybe, she would find happiness again. Not in the way she had once imagined, but in a way that was uniquely hers. For now, that was enough. The end.